you doing, guys? The first time I heard the expression about new light was after one of the old Tuesday night book studies. At the time, we were studying the Revelations and its grand climax. I didn't think much of it. Now, to me, while we were studying it, especially where it came to the part about identifying the eighth king in Revelation, that to me made common sense for anybody who was familiar with the world scene and what was going on. Funny thing was, I also had the publication, The Prophecies of Daniel, and where they would not speculate as to who the king of the north was at that time. All right, well, I had made a video on this about 2 years ago, shortly after Watchtower had identified the final king of the north, and I rebutted it because it sounded totally ridiculous. Although my views have changed slightly since I had made that video. Now, after World War II, it was obvious the entire world scene had changed. Now, two world superpowers had come out of that war. The world was now split in half. You had your capitalist side, led by the United States of America, and you had your socialistic side, which was spearheaded by the then Soviet Union. Now, reading some of the older publications that I had finally come across, where Watchtower said that the Soviet Union would definitely be the king of the north in the time of the end. And a lot of places they were pushing Daniel 11:43 to verify this, where the king of the north had control over the treasures of the king of the south, meaning the nuclear arms buildup, which was not quite the case, because although the United States was spending a fortune building up its military, the Soviet Union was doing the same thing to keep up with the United States, and in some cases, in some years, surpassing the United States. This, on top of a decade-long war in Afghanistan, is what finally broke the Soviet Union. They were no longer in a position to be a superpower. Well, they tried to trot along, but they finally, I believe it was in 1991, that the 15 nations that made up the Soviet Union fell apart. They just went their separate ways, and that includes Russia. They were basically left in the dust. So the United States no longer had a competitor. So now the king of the north was now asleep. There was no king of the north. And for years, the Watchtower and Bible Tract Society did not identify one, basically because there was nobody on the world scene that was competing with the United States. It was during the Persian Gulf War. At the time, the U.S. military was at its peak. When the U.S.-led coalition went into Iraq, the world got to see many of the weaponry that the United States had, and the world powers began to realize that they had to play catch-up. Well, in 2012, Vladimir Putin became president, I believe, for a second time of Russia. He had gotten the green light by then-President Barack Obama to upgrade his military just to keep up. And Obama said, do what you want. Well, he did. What Vladimir Putin did was borrow a fortune from the Federal Reserve to upgrade Russia's military. He then paid off the Federal Reserve and told them to go pound sand and went back to the gold standard. This is one reason why Russia is an easy scapegoat. Well, although Russia is a very powerful military, they do not consider themselves a superpower. Vladimir Putin's interest was simply to pull Russia out of the dust. So to say that Russia, the king of the north, has control over the treasure of the king of the south, being the United States, that's totally wrong. Russia currently is not in a position to be king of the north. So when Watchtower identified the Russians as being the king of the north, why was that? Because Russia is a scapegoat. The 2016 elections pretty much prove that. But just the fact that the puppet masters of Watchtower are also puppets, they answer to those up above as well. See, when Russia went back on the gold standards, they became the bad guys to the central bankers, the Federal Reserves, and the elites of this planet. So Watchtower's teachings are now compromised. So they really had no choice but to appoint Russia as the king of the North. The other thing to consider, why does Watchtower consider Russia the bad guys? Because the Russian Federation seized their property. But anybody who has any critical thinking skills will realize that Russia is not in a position to be king of the North. That may change someday, although I highly doubt it. But there is one country that is in the position to be king of the North that Watchtower has not touched, has never ever mentioned. Now, as far as the king of the North controlling the treasures of the king of the South, consider one thing. There is a country in recent years that has been building up, not just militarily to be a world power, but financially, and that would be China. Now, China not only has been buying up a lot of land in this country, the United States of America, buying into many corporations, but one thing else that the United States has. The United States is indebted to the Federal Reserve an ungodly amount that is virtually impossible to ever pay back. China has purchased much of the debt of the United States. So although both the United States and China over the last few years has been flexing their military muscle, and it's still debatable whose military is more powerful. I mean, China has definitely gotten more powerful over recent years. They now have a navy that could rival ours. But not only are they militarily in a position to oppose the United States, but they're in a position to foreclose on the United States. So even if the United States were to go to war with China, China is in a position where they could literally take over the treasures of the United States. This is something Watchtower will never discuss. As far as they're identifying the eighth king in Revelation, for years they were always identifying the United Nations. Now, for anybody who knows anything about the New World Order, you realize that the United Nations is the strong arm for the New World Order. When we were studying the Revelations as Grand Climax, most of Jehovah's Witnesses didn't know what the New World Order was. But then President Bush in '91 pretty much made that clear what it was, and that the UN would be the strong arm for it. So when Watchtower became NGO members of the United Nations, they could no longer point the fingers at the UN. They couldn't say anything negative about the UN. They were obligated now to not only leave the UN be, but to say something positive about them, which they have in the past. For so many years, the UN were the bad guys, but now they have to leave them alone. So they point to Russia as being the king of the North, and now they just point at the nations to being the eighth king of Revelation. So now Watchtower's teachings are somewhat compromised. They're not even in control of their own teachings. So right now, Watchtower's light is fading. And anybody who is still buying what they're selling deserves what they get. JWs, wake up. These guys are so under control right now, much like Jehovah's Witnesses. They're all puppets. Open your own eyes, look at the world scene, and look what's going on. That's all you have to do. You do not need these 8 Goombas in Warwick to tell you what's happening. No, Russia is not the final king of the North, and they are not in a position to do so. Anyways, guys, that's all I have to mention today. I will talk to you soon. You guys have a good day.